Well, it's a vast question. No, I mean, I need to make a little the sort of history of the way the thing happened. Basically, I am a film critic and theoretician, but it happens that at the end of the 70s, I was very close with Thierry Kunzel, you know. We worked together, made this special issue of communication, cinema and psychoanalysis, etc. And he was a close friend. And in the mid-70s, he just stopped doing theoretical work and progressively shifted towards artistic work. And I must say that the shock I had when I saw his first 5 tapes that he has realized at the end of the 70s has been, for me, an amazing event. I mean, the fact you could do that with images, and this coming from someone I've been so close, because we have been working for this problem of film analysis for years, not together exactly, but in a very close relation. So, and suddenly this domain of video art, which was not even called that way at that time, opened to me. And I had immediately a desire to write about it. And I wrote a long essay, which Serge Danet, who was chief editor of the Cahiers du Cinéma at the time, was so nice to accept. And so it was the beginning for me to jump out of my writing about film and write about video. And so during 10 years after that, I was progressively interested and attracted by other works, you know, going to museums, seeing this and that, and I was progressively asked to participate to special issue of magazine, etc., which means that for 10 years I've been writing all those essays, which have been collected in L'Entre-Images, in the first one, which was published at the end of the 80s in 90. And it was the moment I was approached by Christine Vanache, whom I knew, with whom I had worked, to participate to this big exhibition called Passage de l'Image, which she was curating with Catherine David at the Centre Pompidou. And so during 4 or 5 years, we have been working on this show, which was the first one, really, to try to put together photography, film, video, and computer images. And so this has been a real, for me, a real jump, you know, because we have tried to elaborate a catalogue in which long essays, including the one I've been giving to the catalogue, trying literally to build a sort of theorization of which was not yet called L'Entre-Images, because this is the title of the book I published at the end of those years, but which was going towards this notion. I've tried to build in the text I have been giving to the catalogue, which is called the double helix, which is a sort of image brought to the representation of a genetic code, to try to summarize the categories of passages which could sort of build sort of theoretical approach of this new reality of the image. So there are mainly 3 categories of passages. At least it was the way I've seen that at the time. So the first categories concern all the tight relation between image which move, which means film, video, and those which do not move, like photographs, painting, etc. And it was interesting to see that when we made the selection of films to accompany the show, that there were more and more films which tended to steal themselves on some images, and which has been also working on after painting, etc. And so you had a sort of more and more importance of the still image inside of the movement itself. And this has been, for me, really important, that there was sort of oscillation between the stillness and the movement. And it was interesting to see that in those years, you had more and more events devoted to film and photography, and there were more and more filmmakers attracted to photography, more and more photographers making films, you know, and so sort of movement, which was that even if film was basically moving and the video image was moving, it was constantly haunted by a sort of attraction towards stillness. And for example, there is a tape of Thierry Kunzel which is called Still. And so this was not completely new in a way, because if you take the tradition of animation film, the still image has been there from the very beginning of cinema, but the way in which still images were haunting films was something which we find new and more insisting, I would say, globally from the 60s. The second category of passages has to do more with the photographic analogy, which is the way in which the world, objects, and bodies seem to be defined in reference to natural vision, to a certain fixed state of natural vision, which implies resemblance and recognition, and of which photography and then film have become traditionally the emblem, which means that natural figuration, when it begins to be lost, can be called defiguration, but which has acquired literally a new dimension through the video work and the apparition of the possibility to literally defigurate the image. Like, for example, one very rich example at this level, even if it's not a great film, is Il Misterio di Oberwald that Antonioni directed in those years, in which literally he used video as a tool to transform the image, colorizing many and many parts of the image, so to translate in a way the inner feelings of the character through the changing of the colors. And he had even a big project which he has never completed, which was called The Color of Feelings, you know. So those are the two main levels of passages between the image concerning the image itself. But there is a third element, which is everything which has to deal with the sound and with the words. And it's true that through all those years, with the development of video, you have a sort of a new regime of transformation and of mixities between words and images. And here also the work of Godard can be, you know, quoted as an example. And, or if you take videos, the work of Gary Hill, for example, who has been doing fantastic work at this level. There is a tape of Gary Hill of which the title escapes me right now, but I hope it will come back, in which you have a tree. It's electronically done, and you have a tree, and progressively the leaves of the tree fall down, and when they get on the floor, they have become letters and shaping words. You know, so this is a way in which this third category of passages, dealing this time with image and language, works together. So basically, l'entre-image between the images, as it has been called in English, is thus, well, virtually speaking, the space for all of these passages. And I must insist on one thing, is that more than a concept, which is not exactly, it's a sort of a place, a many-sided place, physically and mentally. And I would say that they are both very visible, the effects, but secretly immersed in the artworks. And it's a function between the images themselves. It's floating as well between two still frames, as well as between two screens, between two layers of matter, as well as between two speeds. So it is hard to describe exactly, because it's a sort of variation, constant dispersion in itself. So I insist very deeply on the fact it's not a concept. It's sort of field of experience, if you want. At the time, we were not so preoccupied by the question of the dispositive because it worked in itself in this show. And I was then more concentrated on the passages between the images inside of the different works than insisting on their specific dispositive of presentation, which seemed naturally predetermined by the proper nature of each work, you know. And this is with us what has changed progressively. That the principle of the installation, whatever formula it adopts, is to conceive each time a new and singular dispositive, one which is accorded to its own and specific needs. And this is contrary, completely contrary, to the cinematic dispositive, which, in spite of all its historical and local variations, is basically defined by its singular and continuous identity. And this has been for me the crucial point on which I've tended to insist, opposing me to the people who were trying to call cinema all this new type of work for installation. And so I've been more and more trying to build an opposition between the spectator of cinema to this very undeterminable being who is confronted in the museum of gallery space to moving images and whom we can't call a spectator, from my point of view, who is a visitor or a looker, le regardeur in French, the stroller from the Benjaminian term, and with always, whatever term is chosen to name him or her, what I could call a dissolved, fragmented, shaken, intermittent spectator, and not a film, a cinema spectator. And so, to define or redefine cinema as such, I've proposed a new insistence on the cinematic dispositif in itself as a guarantee of the specificity and the uniqueness of the experience. The projection of a film in the dark space of the movie theater, according to the precise schedule of a more or less collective séance, remains a condition of a unique experience of memory, which any alternative viewing eludes more or less. This supposes a rule of face, which the spectator incarnates through the enfolding of a liturgy linked to the film, to the cinema, the film in the cinematic situation. So this little formal way of expressing was an attempt of redefinition in a situation in which the viewing situation of the film itself, cinema itself, has been disseminated also through all possible means, you know, from the apparition of television, through the videotapes, the DVD, and the computers, the mobile phone, and the way in which, even if those instruments to see film are very precious and crucial today for writing on film, but they, in a way, they dissolve the uniqueness of the experience, which is an experience of time, you know, and in time. And I will just to remind one sentence of Chris Marker in his CD-ROM In Memory, which was inspired partly from some words of Jean-Luc Godard. Cinema is higher than us. It is that to which we must lift our eyes. When it passes in a lowered object, on which we lower our eyes, cinema loses its essence. We can see the shadow of a film on the television, the longing for a film, the nostalgia, the echo of a film, but never a film. Well, it would certainly be the example of Michael Snow. Because, as you know, Michael Snow has directed two great experimental films in the past called Wavelength and La Région Centrale. And he has always been strictly opposed to the fact that Wavelength would appear on DVD. Because his idea was that Wavelength, which is a film about projection, as you know, and light and space and time, etc., is, for Michael Snow, completely dependent on the cinematic dispositive, which means he has been opposed completely to any publication of the film in DVD, to really make it specific for the cinematic situation. But as things go on, time passes, etc., one day he had this great idea to conceive a new work which he has called Wavelength for Those Who Don't Have the Time, which is, I mean, so funny. He's a real great funny man. And what is this work? It's a DVD of 15 minutes composed of the superimposition of the 3/4 of an hour of Wavelength, which makes a complete new work, and which is a magnificent work, which has always been used for installation. But it was a way, you know, for Michael Snow to theorize in a way where was the difference. And when he says, for those who don't have the time, this means strictly for people who don't have the time to be set up in a movie theater during 45 minutes, and which can, okay, put their DVD on the machine and see just 15 minutes. But what is surprising is the extraordinary quality which is created by this way, because the superposition of the three parts creates a new object, you know, completely improbable and magnificent. And so there is another example of Michael Snow at this level. He has conceived in 2009 one very specific installation, which is called the corner of Braque and Picasso streets, and which consists of a projection. And I will read you the text which Michael Snow has written to introduce this work. Projecting onto a flat surface, usually a screen, has been conventional since the arrival of film in the 1890s. During projection, the planar surface is removed from our perception. It is amazing, but so common as to be unremarked upon, how convincing spatial and motion depiction then becomes. I became interested in investigating what would happen with projection on a constantly visible altered surface. The Braque and Picasso work uses the several plane surfaces of a number of plinths or bases usually used for the exhibition purposes, piled on one the other to make a inside of bracket a screen wall. On this surface, actually happening right now, images of the activities taking place in the street outside the building in which this piece is exhibited are projected. These activities are abstract and modified by their passages from plane to plane, in a way that recalls cubism. The first presentation of this site-specific work was in Barcelona in May-June 2009 at the Àngel Barcelona Gallery. Many of the earliest cubist paintings were done in or near Barcelona in the 90s, just as film was commencing. So this means that with his usual humor, Michael Snow is taking the origins of cinema and the transformation of painting cubism to articulate them together to see how film on one side is a specific dispositif and that you can transform it inside of another dispositif which becomes installation by a simple transformation of the space of the screen, And I find that in the case of this work, as well as in the conception of wavelength for those who don't have the time, Michael Snow is a precious ally for Rancière and for me, for example. Now, so if I am so interested in quoting this example of Michael Snow, it's because from out of his own experience of artist and filmmaker, he has tended to keep the separation between two types of experiences which have many and many and many connections. And a large part of my life has been, working on those connections. But connections which are made also to be capable to maintain a strict separation between two experiences which are, fundamentally different experiences of space and time. And this is the reason for which I wanted to open what I have called a quarrel. La querelle des dispositifs has been, for me, the introductory part and a little bit polemical part of this book, which is in a way the third entre-image. I wanted to open clearly this quarrel to make clear that one can't call cinema what is not cinema, and that the word cinema should be kept for what the film situation of projection is, and the rest could be called whatever, but not cinema. There should be also another example on which I've been writing a lot, which is very interesting for me, is the example of Douglas Gordon, Because, for example, he has made four works, if I remember well, linking film and installation in the brightest way. Feature film, for example, is, how to describe that quickly? He has engaged a conductor to replay the music of Vertigo. He has filmed the conductor, and the film which has come out of this experience is a film in which you see only the hands, the arms, and the face of the conductor. And you have the whole score of Vertigo going on the soundtrack, which means that you are in the position to try to remind, if you have been the spectator of Vertigo, try to remind what has been your experience of the film, which you can't, clearly, because the music of Vertigo is very repetitive and circular, but you are submitted to a confrontation between the two spaces. Because, and out of that, Douglas Gordon has made on one side a film, a regular film, which is to be shown in a film theater, etc., and an installation work in which you have vertigo projected on the screen and the music and the feature film on the other one. So there is a second example of a film by Douglas Gordon, which is a great experience of this connection between film and art. He has decided to make a sort of bizarre object built out of the book of memories of Jonas Mekas called I Had Nowhere to Go. And so he has convinced Mekas to read extracts of the book, which he has chosen and edited in a very specific way, etc., and to project that largely in the dark, with only 16 or 18 interruption of short images from 20 seconds to 1 minute appearing, which are not images of Jonas Mekas, which are images shot by Douglas Gordon to give an equivalent of the type of images Mekas could produce, you know. And it's an extraordinary experience of projection, because you are here in the dark during 1 hour and a half. You are literally riveted to your film situation in a more abstract possible way, because you are in the dark and you are thinking constantly to what affects you through the words of Mekas with his extraordinary voice in English. And those flashes of images that appear and after that disappear, you are in the dark a new time, and it's completely linked, it's sort of insistence on film duration, you know. There have been other examples of films working with the dark. There is a film of Blanche-Neige by Monteiro, or the Marguerite Duras film, etc. But in this case, it acquires a sort of quality of abstract definition of the experience of what is to be a film spectator. And I feel very moving that this insistence comes out of an artist, you know, who's so clever that he wants to understand the two sides of the thing. I don't know if out of this one he will do or not an installation. I don't see how exactly he could do it. But, you know, so you have Snow, you have Douglas Gordon, you have other people, you know, who have insisted on this. So all the artists are not working on the confusion, and all the theoreticians neither. This is dialogue and clarity in the difference and the correspondence between the terms of the two experiences. Yeah, the in-betweenness tends to let me think. Yeah, the in-betweenness in a way is a little bit an ambiguous term, because it could suppose that being in between, you are no more neither in the experience of film or in the experience of art. So when I chose the entre-image, as I've tried to suggest, it was a moment, there was no this type of tension. It was a discovery of a magnificent area of interpenetration of the levels of creation of images, but without having the idea that they could be one time confused. Now it's true that I would not use maybe the term entre-image in the same way. And what was important for me to conceive la querelle des dispositifs, to insist, you know, on the strict definition of each of the dispositif. So to contend the overlapping between installation work, for example, and film projection on another side, which seems to me to be strictly very important to understand how it works together, but not having to be confused.